All right, well, let's eat through a few more questions before we wrap things up here on the show. Jim, this next one was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Keith in Queens. On the post-Full Gear press conference, a reporter asked Bryan Danielson about his ability to finish matches in many ways, and the fact that since he has come to AEW, he might not necessarily have a finishing move. Bryan answered that finishing moves are actually a recent addition to pro wrestling, and a guy like Lou Thesz had multiple ways to finish a match.
What? Wait, what?
Without having a finishing move. Okay. So my question to you is, are definitive finishing moves needed in wrestling?
We've come to this now. Is oxygen needed for life? God damn it. For one thing, no, an individual finishing move for a particular wrestler is not a modern addition. And since the example of Lou Thesz was made, have you ever heard of the Lou Thesz press?
Of course.
Okay. Yes, Lou Thesz and every other wrestler in the history of the world has had a primary finishing move, or their hold, as they get. Grab your best hold used to be the thing. That was indicating the guys were going to shoot. When you would tell a guy you were going to the ring with, grab your best hold, that means, okay, it's on, right? Strangler Lewis, the headlock, for fuck's sake. He made a career out of it. The headlock crusher thing that he had to squeeze together to increase the power of his headlock, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean that every wrestler that had a definitive finishing maneuver never won a match any other way, especially when you come to main events, especially when you come to disputed decisions, especially when you come to finishes that are supposed to start or continue programs. No, you're not just hitting your finish on the guy and beating him. No, you're not just grabbing a submission hold on him and making him tap out. Like now, you built to a certain finish that happened sometimes as a fluke to necessitate a rematch. In that case, it's not a wrestling move that wins. So, I mean, you have a double knockout in the middle of the ring, one guy falls on top of another. Whatever the case, there's all kinds of different ways to finish a match and to win a match or to lose a match. But the idea that a wrestler having his own specialty hold is a modern invention is ridiculous. Wild Bill Longson and the pile driver in the 1940s. Buddy Rogers and the figure four leg lock in the late 40s, early 50s. I could do this all day, but I won't bore everybody. I already have. What is a new invention, as I've been talking about the past few shows, is the idea that a finish just comes out of nowhere with no build and no roller coaster ride that's got the people right up at the top and they're ready to, and boom, and there it is. We're going to do everything we decided to do, and then when we're finished, one of us is going to grab a hold and the other one's going to pass out or tap out. That's how they're building finishes now. So I love Bryan to death, but what he said was exactly the opposite of what is the actual case. Now, whereas before guys had their own holds and built their hold, and their hold was almost, or move or whatever, almost inescapable, almost unstoppable until you got to a main event guy, and then they might kick out of it or whatever. Now just everybody puts a hold on everybody and beats them. And out of nowhere. So I don't know what he's talking about.
All right. Well, let's move on to another question here, Jim.
Do you?
Well, obviously everyone's always had signature maneuvers, signature holds, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
The idea that a guy could just win. We haven't seen too many guys in recent memory, being the last 40, 50 years on TV, that would win a match with a different move every time. I mean, every now and then there's someone with that gimmick, but the idea that it's just a regular occurrence that people don't have finishing maneuvers.
Yeah, and the Midnight Express,
at least in the TV era, I don't know.
The Midnight Express started doing that on TBS, winning a match something different every week, because that was different, and that was, but it was still a finishing move. And then we, after a while, we took the best ones and we eliminated some of the ones that didn't work that well. But again, a lot of time a finish can be a small package or something. The manager tripped the guy and he fell into a small package. 1, 2, 3. Well, that needs a rematch. Or what? It can be anything. But it has to make sense and it has to be built to it. It can't just come out of nowhere, for fuck's sake.
You're not a big fan of modern submissions that are influenced by mixed martial arts. Is that fair to say?
I'm a big fan of the physical combat itself being influenced by mixed martial arts. That's what Ring of Honor in a lot of cases was, a combination pro wrestling MMA style type of combat. But I don't think everybody ought to be tapping out or passing out, and everybody ought to be putting on submissions. I think that ought to be reserved for the people with the extensive amateur backgrounds, or possibly a former MMA fighter, or someone whose gimmick lends itself to something like that, because then it's more special, and then you also don't have guys tapping out constantly. Because, again, until 10, 15 years ago, go to any locker room in the wrestling business anywhere in this country and tell, if there's 8 baby faces in that locker room, tell all 8 of them, I want y'all to tap out tonight, and see how many get in their car and drive off. A baby face only gave up when there was no other resort. And most of the time he'd pass out in the hold rather than give up. And it registered and it meant something. And you remembered it because it wasn't 5 matches on the same show where the same thing happened.